Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer of DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining this DATAVERSITY webinar, Optimize Your BI Environment, 10 High-Impact Strategies, sponsored today by Metric Insights. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A section. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, Zoom defaults the chat to send you just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To find the Q&A or the chat panels, you can click those icons found in the bottom middle of your screen. And as always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 business days containing links to the slides, the recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce you our speakers for today, Marius Moscovici and Mike Smitherman. Marius is the CEO of Metric Insights and has over 20 years of experience in analytics and data warehousing with roles at Oracle, Integral Results, and Linden Lab. He was co-founder and CEO of Integral Results and a leading BI consultancy that was acquired by Idea Integration. He also formed and led the analytics group at Linden Lab. Mike is the VP of Sales and Marketing at Metric Insights. He has over 15 years of product and marketing experience in the business intelligence industry. Mike helped bring analytic products to market with senior roles at Seagate Software, AIM Technology, T-Leaf, Xera, and Good Data. And with that, I'll give the floor to Marius and Mike to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Shannon. This is Marius. Welcome. So today I'm going to talk to you about some areas of significant inefficiency within your BI environment. And obviously, I don't know you, I don't know your organization, and yet I can bet that these areas of inefficiency exist in your environment. And I know this not because I'm assuming that anyone is negligent in trying to be efficient, to be mindful of the resources that they're utilizing, but more so because there are gaps today in governance in most organizations. And the areas that I'm going to talk about, the things that happen, fall through the cracks. These are issues that fall through the cracks because of these gaps in governance, unless you put in the proper governance processes and tools to make sure you're capturing them and continuously kind of improving in these areas. So with that, let's jump in. So the first area I want to discuss is what is a fundamental sort of gap in value generation that occurs today because of low usage of data science and AI solutions. And in fact, I would lump BI solutions into this as well. All right. So let's talk about why does this happen? Well, today in your organization, first of all, you typically have a BI team and an AI team, and they're oftentimes different teams, so they don't necessarily talk to each other all the time. And even within each of those teams across large organizations, if you're part of an enterprise, lots of folks are building solutions for particular areas of the business, and they're not necessarily talking to each other all the time. Right? So there are these various silos, and various solutions are built in these silos, and then it's very, very difficult to have a great deal of broad-based knowledge and understanding across everything that's there. And this is especially exacerbated by situations where people come and go, right? I've got an analyst, they built a bunch of maybe predictive models, they left the organizations and they moved to another team. Now, how does that knowledge then get transferred to the next analyst that comes in, or somebody that's a BI reporting analyst that could actually take advantage of this particular predictive model in solving their problem, but they don't do so because they don't know about it. Right? And it's costly, right? It means that what happens is that there are tools that are being built, solutions that are being created, and these things do not generate the ROI that they could, simply because of lack of awareness. And if you think about, well, what do you need to have in place within your organization to prevent this from happening? You really need a governed space, an analytics marketplace, if you like, where all of your AI assets, are grouped together with your BI assets, everything in a single place. And any analyst that's coming to solve a particular problem can then first, before they go write a line of code or go build a new report, the very first thing they do, they go to this analytics marketplace and they see what already exists that could be helpful in solving that problem. Mike is going to show you an example of what that looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. Hey, everyone. So as Marius said, I'm going to, as we go through these different points, for some of them, I'm going to show you some sort of practical examples of what this might look like using a tool and how it might materialize in your environment. So this is the Metric Insights Analytics Marketplace opening screen. And as Marius said, what's critical here is behind the scenes, we're linking to all sources of data and analytics and AI and BI in the organization to essentially create a marketplace catalog of all the assets that might be interesting to an analyst who is trying to answer a particular question or solve a particular data problem for their users. And so the idea is that they should be able to come in here and pose the question in the marketplace. In this case, what analysis do we have for improving user acquisition in the organization? And if I run that, what it's doing is essentially analyzing that request on the right-hand side here to say, okay, what is the intent behind that question? What are some of the key terms that we're asking about here? In this case, obviously around user acquisition. And looking through all the different types of assets that we have in the organization that might help with that. And initially, obviously, it's saying here that we don't have anything that looks specifically around improving user acquisition as we look through the metadata of these assets, but there are certain things on the left-hand side here that we've discovered that may help or maybe a starter for the analysis that you're trying to do. And the key is that it's across different types of assets. So at the top, we've got a data set in Power BI. In the middle, we've got an R Shiny app looking at demographics that seems to have some user acquisition information in it. And we've also got a Tableau dashboard that touches on that area. And as we bring back essentially these search results, if you like, being able to drill into further metadata around what that asset is, things like ownership, things like what metrics it might contain, things like the categorization of the data that's in there is important to initially understand whether this is something that might be helpful for me. And then having it link out to the other tools and the areas where that exists. So obviously I would want to be able to click on this data set. If this is going to be the starter for the analysis that I'm going to put together, I should be able to click on that and take me out to that data set within the tool, in this case, Power BI, where I may want to go and build a dashboard. Or equally, maybe we're synced up with our data catalog, in this case, Atlan, where the marketplace should be able to bring up these results and provide me a link back into potentially further metadata around, in this case, the data set in Atlan. So we've cataloged it here. We've got further categorization. I can see this data set has been certified, and it's something that I might want to use. So the key being that we can essentially provide an environment for analysts to discover what's out there that might help them answer their questions so that they're not jumping in and recreating these things off the bat.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So next up, if you just look at your BI team for a moment and you think about maybe multiple BI teams across the organization, various analysts that are building reports, one of the things that naturally occurs and happens is that over time, people build duplicative reports and analytics. I'm building something, I'm not necessarily aware that something already exists. I go create it, or maybe somebody's creating something at the same time. And there's sort of overlapping ecosystem of content where there's lots of duplicates associated with it. And this is just, again, happens because I don't necessarily, when I'm building something as an analyst, I may not know what already exists. If I don't have the marketplace, for example, that might be the case. And then I also may not be aware of what's being built right now. right? And so over time, there's just going to be naturally overlapping content. And unless I have access to the other content, I may not even realize that it's there. And then naturally what happens is, you get that situation where users come in and they have maybe two different reports. They look like they're almost the same, but they're not quite. Which one should I use? Or even worse, two users show up in a meeting from the business, one with one number, one with a different number, and they don't have a way to reconcile it because they use different sources, right? This is costly because it, first of all, obviously duplication of effort is incredibly expensive. You're talking about BI analyst time, which is, highly expensive, seasoned type professionals that you pay a lot of money for. Also, generating inconsistent results, inconsistent metric definitions is really problematic in most organizations, obviously, because it generates a corrosion in the trust that you have between the business and the IT team and the BI team. So you want to be able to handle and reduce those costs. And from a controls perspective, right, what you need to do is you need to have a mechanism that's really running all the time that detects and flags overlapping reports. Now, if you have a ecosystem where things have been running for some time, then potentially lots of duplicates have built up and you probably need a cleanup effort. But what we're going to show you in a minute is addresses that, but also addresses a control where you need to, on an ongoing basis, continuously, you want to be able to detect, flag, and eliminate overlapping reports before they get published for users to consume.
So yeah, let's take a look at what this might look like. And as Marius said, the initial sort of goal here is to tidy up the environment that you have today. So I'm in, again, metric insights here. I'm in our duplicate detection. So we're looking for, not just, as Marius said, duplicate reports, but reports that are potentially similar where we could consolidate or rationalize it. What's happening here in the tree on the left-hand side here is we're connected to various instances of BI tools. So I've got a couple of connections to Tableau servers here. I've got a connection to our Power BI instance in the cloud. And this folder structure that you're seeing on the left-hand side is obviously what is structured on the tool itself. So in this case, different sites and folders and projects in our Tableau instance. And what we're doing is we're looking for essentially clusters of similar, potentially overlapping or duplicate reports. And so each of these reports that you're seeing in this list here has been identified because it has similar properties to other reports in the instance. And that can be across tools. We're not just talking about within this particular Tableau instance. We're looking at metadata across the different tools and technologies. And so what you want to be able to do is say, okay, let's take one of these reports that we might be interested in. So I pick that sales analysis report. And this is similar to, how many have we got here? Six other reports, 7 other reports that we have across our BI platforms here. And I'll talk about how we've identified them as similar. But you've got your list of reports here. In the list, we've got this overlap score. So these reports look like they have a high overlap, high similarity with other reports in this cluster. We've obviously got some additional information here, like when these reports were created, who last viewed them, what the usage of these reports are in terms of how often are they getting looked at in the last 90 days. And then importantly, who has access to these reports as well. So I want to be able to know which groups of users or users potentially might be looking at this content. And so what it allows us to do is it basically picks a main report, as we call it. And initially, this is based on the report that has the highest usage over the last 90 days, but you can change which you can consider the main report. And it allows me to compare our potential duplicate that we found with that main report. And if I click on the compare screen over here, It slides out a panel here, which basically explains why we're getting that 94% overlap. So what you're looking at here is our sales analysis report that has the most usage compared to this potential duplicate called sales analysis. I've got some information at the top. The first table here is looking at the different columns that exist in both of these reports. So when we've created these reports, in this case in Tableau, what are the columns that that Tableau report is using? And what are the potential overlaps here? So in this case, you can see there's 100% overlap in terms of the columns that exist in both of these reports. So, a good indicator that there's similar information in here. The second thing we look at is the lineage of the reports. So which database tables, views, data sets are these reports based on? And you can see again, in this case, they're both based on this database table, and they're both pulling in the same column information from that table. So the lineage is 100% overlap as well. And then thirdly, we look at the metadata associated with these reports, so titles, descriptions, to identify keywords and look at, again, potential overlap there. And I can see in this case, the only difference between these two reports is a slight change in a slight difference in the title of the report that I'm looking at. So in this case, this is probably a good candidate for being a duplicate report that's been created. I can select those two reports that I was just comparing, and obviously, my final check would probably be compare what they look like side by side to see whether they do indeed look like they're the same report. And in this case, it looks like I have two Tableau reports here that are pretty much identical, other than the title. The final thing I probably want to then do is, for this potential duplicate, is have some sort of way of instigating a workflow or a process that allows us to tidy up the environment. So, if I've determined I actually need this report and this duplicate is being used for something, I could, remove it from the cluster so it doesn't keep popping up. But more likely, I'm going to assign this to someone, maybe the owner of this report, the person who created it, to have them check about whether this is something that they should remove or delete because it's an overlap. So we can use this to tidy up the environment. We can also use it as an ongoing, we should be able to use it as an ongoing rationalization effort as new content gets created. So you should have in place the ability to start notifying people, content creators, when they have potentially duplicate or overlapping reports in their BI systems that they've created, so that they can go and look at those and again tidy them up. Also, as they're creating new content, if I'm creating, say, a new Tableau analysis here and I publish a draft version of that, we should be able to alert that user to say, okay, hang on, it looks like you're creating something here that is overlapping, in this case, with a Power BI report that we already have in place. Are you sure you want to continue and publish this? And we can try and cut it off at the pass and make sure you're not wasting too much time on this.
Thank you, Mike. And obviously, with duplicate reports, it's one of the challenges, or it's not overlapping reports, and not necessarily going to be 100% overlap, but it's going to be, maybe 60, 70, 80% overlap, and it's still, but yet it's still very meaningful to eliminate and reduce those, just because it cleans up your environment and significantly also reduces load that you have on your Power BI, Tableau ecosystem, all the tools that are out there. So another sort of similar issue, but is a little bit different in the way that it kind of impacts the system, is duplicating semantic models. So here, you may or may not have duplicate reports that feed off of this, but fundamentally you have different semantic models, or that's Power BI parlance, or data sets in Tableau concept, data sources that have been defined, where there essentially has a significant amount of overlap in terms of the tables and the columns that are used those. So you can imagine I'm collecting data from a particular set of tables, large tables, I'm joining everything together, and then you're doing the same thing on your side. You just have a set, 2 more columns than I do, right? And that's obviously happens again because oftentimes analysts are working independently. They may be geographically diverse in different places. I'm not aware of what's there already, maybe not aware of what's already been created. And it's incredibly costly in today's world because, usually people are using cloud databases for these, and you pay for all the load that you're incurring on those databases. And so in this situation, if there's a significant amount of overlap, we're basically doubling or tripling the load and the cost associated with populating these semantic models, when in fact we could just consolidate those models together and just do it, and then just do it all in one pass. So, that's a key issue. And the control that's needed here is really very similar to what just Mike showed you, and we're going to not rehash the demo, but if you apply that same paradigm to the semantic model layer and say, hey, which semantic models do we have out there that are in fact overlapping, that are being used by reports, then that overlap, again, based on metadata, based on lineage, based on the columns that are included in there. If there's enough of an overlap, then those things ought to be consolidated. And when you consolidate them, you can generate significant savings. As well as, obviously, the same as before with reports, metrics and KPIs and measure them are then consistently measured. So next item, let's talk a minute about the unused content, so unused BI reporting tool and tool licenses. So oftentimes what happens in organizations today is that you will go out and purchase a set of licenses for Tableau, Power BI, Cognos, Click, whatever you're using, and you will essentially allocate them to a group in the organization. Hey, everyone in finance should be using this. Everyone in manufacturing should be using this. But what happens is, and oh, by the way, we're purchasing different types of licenses with different capability, and they're publishers of content, and publishers of content, that license might be much more expensive, but I'm assigning it to every single person who I think might be an analyst in this organization who might publish reports. But in fact, what you find happens is some of the publishers don't publish any reports, so they're kind of over provisioned, and some of the people for which you've given licenses to, just even for viewing and consuming reports, don't consume the reports. They're not going to use analytics. So in both of those scenarios, you are overspending on licensing. You're taking valuable company resources that you could allocate elsewhere and towards productive uses, and you're instead spending it on licenses that are going underutilized or not utilized at all, right? Obviously, this is costly because if you are paying on a per seat level, you're spending a lot of money on licenses that are not generating any value at all. And then from a control perspective, what you need to do is be able to track and monitor on an ongoing basis what is either not used or underutilized, and automatically deprovision those scenarios, right? So if I'm not using the license for, let's say I don't use it for 6 months or 3 months, whatever that right threshold is, I should, in Tableau, for example, I should be able to have the system should deactivate that license for me, so that then you coming in, or you might come in from your organization. Now, all of a sudden, you're able to use that a license. You're not sharing the same license, but you're using a different license, and the cost is essentially stays flat, right? So that's the idea. And same with a downgrade concept. If I have a creator license in Tableau, I'm not using it, I haven't done any of the creator levels. Well, you ought to be able to downgrade me to an explorer or viewer based on what I'm actually using. And then that way you can save funds. And if I come back later and I want to upgrade, then of course there needs to be a mechanism for me to allow me to come back in and bring me back up. But on a macro level, that can save a lot of money.
Let's take a look at what that might look like. And again, I think similar to the similar and overlapping reports, there's really 2 pieces to this. There's a cleanup effort. So understanding today what is out there that's going unused, and then there's kind of looking at it from a content perspective on an ongoing basis. Reports are useful, and then over time they potentially become obsolete. So how do we recognize those? So similar to our similar report screen, in this case, we're just looking at, again, the structure of the different BI tools that we're connected to on the left-hand side. But in this case, we're just looking at reports that have had no views over a particular period of time. In this case, 90 days with no views. And as I drill into these different, again, within Tableau here, these different folders and sites within Tableau, I can see reports that have no usage. And obviously they have no usage, but I'm probably doing a little bit of analysis here to understand what's going on. So I can see this first report isn't being used. Understanding what that report is built off of from a lineage perspective. In this case, a sales table in our SQL data warehouse can help to say, okay, are there any other reports built off this table that might be interesting, that that may be an indication that this one is redundant and people are using the other one. Probably also interesting to know who actually has access to the report, even though it's had no views recently. In this case, I've got a bunch of users and user groups with access to the report. So there's plenty of people who can go and view this, but they haven't. I probably want to know if it's my exec team who have access and they're not using it to understand why, or whether something else might be more relevant before I, again, potentially put this into a workflow and decommission it or take licenses away. So it starts with understanding the usage of the content itself and who has access to that content and what they're accessing. And then behind the scenes, being able to then tie that to what Marius was talking about, the licensing of those tools. So if I can see users, even though they have access to certain reports and dashboards, are not ultimately using those and therefore are not utilizing their licenses, I need to be able to see who those users are, and whether it's deactivating those users or whether it's downgrading their licenses, as we spoke about before. I need to be able to do that easily from within the solution. And so in this case, here's all the users that haven't looked at any content, even though they have access to it in the previous 90 days or whatever it might be, and there's an opportunity for savings here. On an ongoing basis, as we kind of publish content, that's something we want to be tracking as well. So as a report gets published, as users are then given access to those reports, again, typically as new stuff gets created, it gets usage initially. Over time, it often becomes obsolete as the business changes. It sort of hits its shelf life. Seeing those things happen, tracking that engagement at the content level and how it relates to, again, who has access to those reports and whether they're looking at them or not, is critical to keeping that tidy environment that we were talking about, and cost savings from a licensing perspective.
Thank you. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about, this is just a really prevalent issue, where you really have a high cost of ownership for a BI app where you actually have fairly low usage. So this is a really thorny issue, because what happens is, let's imagine today, right? There's a big business priority. Hey, business team comes to you, you're a BI analyst, and says, look, we need to build this new analysis. We don't have it. Data sources are identified. You're bringing in the data, you transform it, you load it. Lots of data is involved. You build the analytics. You've got this app that has the analytics on top of the data. It's great, provides value. Over time, business needs change. And oftentimes what happens is that app that was just incredibly high usage 6 months ago or 9 months ago is starting to suffer. There's lower and lower usage for this. And yet, behind the scenes, the same expensive database loads are happening. Every day you're loading and transforming data in Snowflake or Databricks or BigQuery, and you're paying for that. Every day you're bringing in the data into data sets in Tableau or Power BI, and you're consuming resources and taking up capacity on that. And yet the ROI that you're getting for that spend is completely out of whack with the cost, right? So this is a fundamental issue, and it happens because there's very little visibility for the full cost for a particular BI application by the people that are creating it over time, right? That cost isn't just about that Tableau Power BI dashboard. It's about all of the data pipelining that goes on underneath. And unless you kind of add up all those costs together, and then compare it with like what kind of engagement are you getting at on front end, you could have situations where you're paying thousands and thousands of dollars every month to maintain applications that are being used very infrequently by very few people. Or you could have mismatches where, I'm running this load every hour thinking that it's really important that the data be up to speed in this app, but in fact, the people consuming the application are only looking at it at most once a day, right? And so there's a mismatch there, and you can save a ton of resources and therefore dollars by just aligning the way that the thing is consumed with the actual frequency at which you're updating the data, things like that. So clearly, it's very costly, and what's worse, these kinds of issues are really hidden in plain sight. They're there. If you ask the users, they'll tell you you're not using it that frequently. If you ask the analyst, they'll tell you it's expensive, but yet connecting the dots there does not happen, right? And the key missing control, right? The key missing thing that needs to be placed is that you've got to be able to report in an automated fashion on what is the total cost of usage for your BI app. That is, take a look at the not only the BI report itself, but the backend usage and factor that in. Right? So you need sort of something like this, where you've got a console where you come in and you can say, okay, here are optimization. Here's the places where I've bubbled up. I've looked at across all of the different reports that I have out there that have clustered into apps based on the usage patterns. I need to be able to bubble up and say, where does it look like I've got some misalignment? Situations where I've got little or no views for content, where the spend on that content, when I look at the total dollars spent associated with transforming, loading that data, and the licensing associated with that, with users that are assigned to that, right? Where does that spend crosses a certain threshold, and the usage is below a certain threshold? And if you can bubble those things up and find those, then you can identify specific actionable applications that either need to be rethought or completely decommissioned. And through those actions, significant dollar savings can be achieved. So another sort of similar issue that just comes up oftentimes is from inefficiency. This is again from the data pipelining perspective. It's scenarios where you've got full massive data loads happening instead of incremental updates on large tables. So this happens because it's very easy for you to be able to just write hey, I'm going to load this data from a staging environment into maybe a summary table of some sort or something like that. It's 100 times easier to say select, just do a full load every time, truncate the table and reload every time you do it, right? The implementation pattern is easier, less lines of code. If I'm in a hurry as a data engineer, very easy for me to do that and just go, okay, let's create that and I'll come back to it if I need to do something about it later. Historically, if you did this in those environments, in the legacy environments where you had, maybe you were using an Atiza or a Teradata or some Oracle or some large on-premise system, well, you would pay some huge performance penalty in doing this. And, people would start complaining about how slow the database is running, and you would have to go and clean that up. But in today's world, where everybody's using cloud environments, what happens? Well, instead, everything scales behind the scenes, and the database is perfectly happy. Your Snowflake or Databricks environment is perfectly happy. You're going to scale up and handles your load. And instead, what takes place is that you've got these big costs that happen that you only maybe see at the end of the month, right? You've got all this extra database processing where I'm running a full load instead of doing an incremental load on a very large data set. So this is something that absolutely needs a control, because you just can't count on people being mindful of this, because they're not aware of how much it's costing when they're building it. And that control needs to be to identify the table loads and find those table loads where you've got very large loads happening for large tables frequently, right? And then flag them and say, hey, here's the scenario. Here's the tables that we appear to be loading, where you've got I've got my scenario where I've got this table. It's going to cost me $3,000 to load, and it's got these many tables. And do I really need to do that, or should I change that to an incremental feed? And making sure that that alert or notification goes to the right people, so that they can then take the optimization action where it's appropriate to put in place. Maybe there's a very good legitimate reason. Maybe there's just no way to get around that. The incremental processing wouldn't be efficient, in which case, okay, you just dismiss that. But in many cases, in fact, the majority of cases, it just requires a little bit more work. Replace a full load pattern with an incremental load pattern, and then you can significantly reduce the overhead on your database, and therefore reduce the costs that you're incurring from that wasteful implementation pattern. So then, kind of the final item that we want to cover, that it really, I think, it maybe is a maybe catch-all for a lot of things that can be happening in your environment, is that if you don't have an automated mechanism by which you are detecting surges in your database consumption, that is, if you're using a Snowflake, a Databricks, a GCP, something like that, where you are paying by the consumption model, right? Where you're paying for every query it costs you. And if you are not monitoring that usage on an ongoing basis, and then generating actionable alerts when that usage spikes, going to the person that can actually take action on it, then by definition, there's going to be a huge amount of inefficiency and waste in the system, right? And this happens because in most organizations, new reports, new ETL is being introduced into your environment all the time, every day. And yet, the database spending is usually being monitored maybe once a month. Somebody gets the bill from GCP or from Azure, and then they take a look at it, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we spiked all of a sudden. What's going on?" And then the questions get asked, and then an analysis is performed. And that just doesn't work. I'll give you as an example. One of our customers, I won't say who it is, but one of our customers reported to us that, at one point they had in a single month something like 30% increase in their GCP spend on BigQuery. They run tens of thousands of queries, right? And they did, it took them weeks to figure out what was causing that. Where did that load come from? And so that was, it occurred. It took weeks to realize that it had happened. Then it took weeks to realize why it was happening and to change it. And as a result, right, what happened was it resulted in this massive overrun that took a really long time to resolve, right? So you want to avoid that at all costs. And then the control that you need ultimately here, right, is you need to be able to have proactive mechanisms to do two things. One, to detect spikes in consumption as soon as they're occurring. If my month-to-date spike if today's usage is significantly heavier, kind of coming into this point in time, than what it was this time last month, I should know about it. If the daily usage is that high. Then the second thing I need to do is isolate where that consumption is coming from. How is today's load significantly different than the same load that I was running last week, last month, etc. And then identify those specific items that are contributing to that and route those to the people that have created them to make sure that those are in fact legitimate needs that are being met through efficient usage rather than inefficient, wasteful consumption that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so again, let's jump across here, look at the tool. Really what that's about doing is tracking these different indicators automatically. So, an example might be here where we are tracking that overall month-to-date spend from Databricks or whatever your cloud environment is, looking at a macro level at what that spend is, but having a way of automatically identifying anomalies within that spend. So in this case, looking at outliers where spend has spiked and is something, again, on a month-to-date basis, not at the end of the month, so that we can be proactive in understanding what's going on here. And the key being, when we have a spike in spend, that we can drill into the details around that to do further analysis, at the query level potentially. So, as I drill into that spike, understanding, what new queries have been added into the system this month. So, at the top here, this table of new queries that are adding to our cost, and then, more importantly, what has changed. So existing queries where the bulk of them have not changed significantly in spend, but suddenly there's been a spike in some of our queries that have been running to add a significant amount to the overall cost of where we're at this month. Being able to do that down to the query level, understand and diagnose very quickly where these changes in spend are happening, is critical to being able to jump on it quickly and not let this get out of control, as Marius said, where at the end of the month you're coming in and seeing a massive change in what we have there.
Okay, so let's kind of talk about architecturally, what are all the different pieces? Because you've seen sort of various pieces of the puzzle. And so I want to kind of give you an overview of the architecture, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into one of the items here that we have not yet shown you an example of, right? So we think of this insights optimization platform, or this platform to kind of optimize and ensure that there are no cracks in between these different areas, and ensuring that you're actually taking advantage optimally across the entire stack of BI tools, databases, and your AI and data portfolios, as having sort of three pieces, right? So there's this BI optimizer piece, and the function of the optimizer is to reduce BI spend and optimize total cost of ownership for your BI stack. So that applies to the things we just looked at, as far as identifying recommendations for things that are, duplicate reports, unused reporting, unused licensing, looking at total cost of ownership, and misalignments there, ETL misalignments, all those kinds of issues, identifying and resolving those, and having both a process, but also tooling to enable you to do that. So there's BI optimization. The second leg of the stool is BI Portal, which is a governed space to consume analytics for your end users. And we'll show you that in a moment. This applies to really making sure that once you've built those analytics, those reports, those AI tools, that all of your users can find those and consume them in very easy, simple, governed environment, right? And then the third piece is the analytics marketplace. I think we showed you at the very beginning, where for your analysts now, all of the assets that are there, that are tools, that are, things that are currently maybe hidden and tucked away inside your data catalogs, inside your AI tools, inside BI tools, have them combined together and brought together in a single place. So as an analyst, I can come in and I can understand, how do I get started from what already exists, rather than me going out and reinventing the wheel and rebuilding. So we've looked at the BI optimizer, we've looked at analytics marketplace, and Mike is going to show you a little bit of the BI portal concept and what's involved there for your regular users.
Yeah, so I think we've got a couple more minutes there before we jump to questions. So let's take a quick look, as Marius said. So yeah, so the final sort of piece of the puzzle here is being able to simplify the consumption of analytics for your end users. So I think, with this growing world of many different sources of data and analytics and reporting across the organization, for those that aren't analysts, for those that have a few minutes a day to think about metrics and reports and data, it can be somewhat overwhelming. You want to provide them a very concise way of knowing that they're looking at certified and accurate reports, and that they're looking at the right versions of things. So that requires creating some sort of centralized portal or catalog where, once we've been through our cleanup effort and we've created, certified content, we can publish it into a central place. And so a user should be able to come to something like this where all that certified content is available. They should obviously be able to browse and search through that content. But when they access a particular report as well, it should be seamless to them in terms of what that report is, that the metadata that describes what that report contains and how it should be used and who owns it, what metrics and terms are used in that report, how are things defined, how are things calculated, who owns those definitions, sort of a glossary of terms that a report contains. Any information coming from our data catalogs that might indicate, maybe this contains sensitive information or is confidential or for internal use only. All of that should be available to the user so that they're literate around what this report is. And when they access this content, we should remove the complexity of knowing which tool or technology a particular report or asset was created in. I shouldn't have to know that this is a Tableau report, or conversely, I'm accessing a report right next to it, which was built in Power BI. The experience should be seamless to the user. And so, with this, then we can publish our certified reports. We can publish them with the necessary metadata. As an end user, I have one place to come and consume that information, interact with it. And obviously, we're tracking then on an ongoing basis all the stuff we've been talking about. So, who's accessing these reports? What tables are they built on? So that we can feed it back into that continuous loop where we're continually keeping up to speed on the reports and analytics and data that we actually want to be using, and getting rid of stuff that is costing us or has become obsolete. So with that, I know we've got sort of just under 15 minutes left. Maybe I'll pass it back to you, and we can answer some questions here, Shannon.
Sounds good. Well, thank you both so much, as always, for a great presentation. Just a reminder to answer the most commonly asked questions. I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday to all registrants with links to the slides and links to the recording. And if you have questions for Mike and Marius, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel there. We've got some time. So diving in here, so does this duplication analysis extend to capture and analyze Excel files, which is still one of the key data reporting, modeling, analytics tools?
Yeah, so I will answer this more generically. Of course, I answer about Excel, but more generically, each reporting tool you have in your ecosystem has a different level of metadata that you can expose from it. So in your example, the Excel, you can look to identify duplicates there. Absolutely. Obviously, there you don't have lineage information, right? That's inside of Excel, but you do have basic metadata around, like naming of the report. What are the key terms used there? If that Excel document is, let's say, in SharePoint, there may be tagging, there may be other metadata. So the approach that we use is we take whatever metadata is available, and then we use that in the matching algorithm. Obviously, the more metadata you have, if you're looking at a Power BI or a Tableau or a Click or an environment where you can expose lots and lots of metadata, including lineage, including column data at the report level, then the quality of what you can generate vis-a-vis matches is much higher. But you can do that across anything, even simple, even a set of Excel files. You can look to say, of the things that we've published out there, where do we have reports that look like they're potentially the same name, and if they're tagged in the same way, and so on. I think that's important.
I think I'd add, if you're using some sort of centralized portal where you're publishing Excel alongside your other BI tools, in a lot of cases, you can put in a process that requires metadata to be added to that file or that spreadsheet at the time of publishing. So maybe you require that it be tagged and has a description and has ownership. And that can be then used on an ongoing basis to compare it against other things. And if there's a lack of metadata, that might be an indication that that's something that we want to flag as a potential, file that's out there that's not really been published in a certified way. Therefore, we want to take a look at it and see whether it's relevant to the organization.
Yeah.
Very nice. So where do code reviews, walkthroughs fit into the efficiency discussion on process?
So we didn't really talk about that very much because we were really looking at kind of the post creation process. I think that, this is a great question by I guess, Ariel, about the fact that, there's obviously in the creation of the analytic itself, or if you've got data science team and you're working on building things, obviously you need to have a code review process or review process. Mike didn't have time to show you in the publishing process for analytics. If you were to put them into the portal or put them, we have a mechanism workflow there that you can leverage, so that you can have a review of all analytics before they get actually published into a category by somebody, and that as part of that review, person can go in and take a look and see, how does this report work with how are they joining data, how is that all working in a way that is it consistent with how it's working, how that is implemented in other areas. The same thing can be done with models. So there's a I don't know if you want to show that, Mike, and that might be a better way to, rather than me talking about it.
Yeah, let's take a look
So
quick.
let's
I'm just
look
going
at
to show my screen again quick, Shannon, as we got a few minutes here. Let's go
Yeah,
here.
so this is an example,
Yeah.
So this would be an example of a publishing workflow where you would have those kinds of controls. So imagine for a moment, all your analysts are building whether some of these are maybe IA models, some are reports, maybe, whatever out there, creating Power BI Tableau. You've got a situation where now automatically they come up in a pending review as soon as they're put in a place where they're ready to get published, but they don't get published to that portal where users are consuming it right away. Instead, there's a developer review section, and that can be your code review section, right? Where somebody goes in and looks at it and says, okay, is this thing that's going to be published, is it consistent with all the other things that are being published in this area? And by the way, this isn't necessarily just like one person doing everything across your enterprise. That's not possible. You delegate this out so that maybe a team lead for each area is responsible for reviewing the items in their area. Maybe there's a business review section. Maybe this is something, maybe these assets in this area are going into they're going to go to the board and your CEO, and they're really high risk assets where you just got to make sure the numbers are right. So you're going to have somebody in the finance team take a look at that. Maybe there's a data steward review to make sure that you've got the right quality checks in place, the data quality is in place. And then only after all that, then it could go into a published and certified state and get published on the portal. And this underscores the need of why it's so important at the end of the day, from a controls perspective, to have a governed space for viewing and consuming your analytics from your users. Because only if you're forcing some kind of process like this, and it might be a simpler process or more involved, whatever makes sense for you, but only if you're enforcing something like this, can you make sure that at the end results, you've got a set of published and certified content that everyone can trust that has high quality.
And back to the Excel question, this is where, one of these tiles going through the process here could be an Excel sheet. And as part of the governance process you put in place, maybe you enforce a particular stage where additional metadata is added into the process and, is required to be added. Maybe, you have to add tags and ownership and documentation where we might get that automatically from another BI tool, for example.
Right.
And so that enriches the metadata that we can pick up from the tool itself.
Perfect. Thank you. And there's a question here. Is there an integration with Microsoft Fabric? Do you have a list of what you integrate with?
Yeah, so you can look, I think I believe on our website, we have the information about all the tools that we integrate with as far as Fabric specifically. There are a number of different integration points. If you're running, we do, like if you're using a Databricks type of ecosystem, things like that, we integrate with that. You can get queries out of that. There's also an integration point around the auditing analytics that are collected in Fabric around Power BI, where we can pull in various lineage information from that. So there are a number of different integration points there. It's probably, if this individual is interested, just reach out to us and we can kind of delve deeper into that.
Perfect. And I will put that in the chat there for everybody, the link to your integrations. All right. So how reliant is the analytics tool on completeness of the metadata associated with the various reports, models, data assets? Can the tool autofill metadata using new age AI, Gen AI capabilities?
So today the tool is not, well, first of all, the workflow that we showed you is the way you get to completeness. So the philosophy that we use is bring in any metadata that exists from the source system that you're collecting in. So if you have tagging in Tableau or Power BI, we'll bring it in. If you have certification information from there, we'll bring it in. If you're using an Atlan or a Calibra or a Relation, and you have additional metadata captured, like glossary terms and their definitions or certification or additional information about that reporting object, we'll bring that in, right? So you bring in everything that is available. Then you have that governance process that Mike was showing a moment ago that ensures that everything adheres to a minimum standard in order to be able to publish and certify. As part of that, you supplement the metadata. And today we don't, you do that manually. Upcoming in our roadmap, we will make recommendations for that based on using our Gen AI capability that's included in the tool. So that's coming in the roadmap. Today, you actually provide that manually, but that is directionally. But we would never assign it automatically with AI because, the last thing you want is to have metadata that's been sort of like auto-assigned by an AI that's maybe 90% correct, then 10% of the time that stuff is nonsense, right? That's not what you want in a governed certified environment. So the right approach, we believe here, is to recommend potential matches, make it really easy for you to be able to, go ahead and publish them, but to have a human in the loop in that review process so that anything that's being added has been added in a way that we know is high quality.
So important. Mike and Marius, that's all the questions that we have at this time. Everyone has been so great. It's been such another great webinar. I just always enjoy doing these webinars with y'all each year.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah, and just a reminder to everyone, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording. So thank you all. Hope you all have a great day.